Something happened in the quiet hours that the person you love never planned to confess, and by the time the sun began to rise, they were holding a message meant only for you. They did not write it quickly. They did not type a few careless words and press send. They sat alone in a room where everything felt strangely still, listening to the soft hum of the world outside while their heart argued with their fear. A dim lamp glowed beside them. Their phone rested face down on the table. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper covered in sentences that had been written, crossed out, and written again. At the top of the page were 4 words. I owe you honesty. But beneath those words was a truth they had never been brave enough to say aloud. For a long time, you believed their silence meant they had forgotten you. You watched days pass without the answer you hoped for. You noticed the distance in their voice, the unfinished conversations, and the way they sometimes seemed close enough to reach, only to disappear behind another wall. What you could not see was what happened after those moments. Whenever they walked away from you, they replayed everything alone. They remembered the expression on your face when they changed the subject. They remembered the warmth in your voice when you tried to make things easier for them. They remembered the questions you did not ask because you sensed they were already struggling. And every memory left them with the same unsettling thought. What if you had understood them more deeply than anyone else ever had? That question frightened them because it placed a responsibility in their hands. If you truly saw them, then they could no longer pretend their choices affected only themselves. Their hesitation had touched your heart. Their confusion had created questions you were forced to carry. Their silence had spoken, even when they refused to. So they tried to convince themselves that distance was kindness. They told themselves you would be happier without their uncertainty. They imagined that staying quiet would allow you to move forward. They repeated this explanation until it almost sounded believable. But then something small happened. Not dramatic. Not public. Just a moment that reached a place inside them they had been avoiding. They were sitting with someone they trusted, a person who had watched them grow quieter over the past several weeks. The conversation began casually. There was coffee cooling between them, afternoon rain tapping against the window, and a song playing softly from another room. The person across from them asked, "Why do you keep checking your phone?" Your person immediately placed it on the table. "I'm not." The answer came too quickly. The other person looked at them for a moment, then said, "You only do that when you're hoping to hear from someone." Silence followed. Your person tried to smile, but the expression disappeared before it fully formed. They looked toward the rain, watching silver trails move down the glass. Then the question came. Is this about them? Your name was not spoken. It did not need to be. The person you love lowered their eyes, and in that instant, the truth entered the room before they were ready to admit it. They had been waiting for you. Not because they expected you to chase them. Not because they wanted proof that you still cared. They had been waiting because some part of them hoped you would somehow know they were struggling to find their way back. Their friend leaned forward and asked, "Do they know how you feel?" Your person stared at the untouched coffee. No. Why not? This time, the silence was longer. Because the real answer was not simple. They were not afraid that you would reject them. Deep down, they suspected your heart had already shown them enough. They were afraid you might believe them. They were afraid you might open the door again, and they would have to step through it without the excuses that had protected them for so long. They were afraid that loving you honestly would require them to become honest with themselves. That was the first emotional shift. Until that conversation, they had believed their greatest problem was timing. They thought life had become too complicated, that circumstances were too uncertain, that the connection between you had arrived before they were prepared. But as the rain continued against the window, they realized timing was not what had kept them away. Fear had. The person across from them did not offer comfort immediately. Instead, they asked a sharper question. What exactly are you afraid will happen if you tell them? Your person looked up. For a moment, their face changed. The careful composure disappeared, and something unguarded surfaced. I'm afraid they'll ask why it took me so long. There it was. Not the whole truth, but the doorway to it. They imagined standing before you with nothing hidden. They imagined seeing the hurt they may have caused. They imagined having to explain why they kept their feelings buried while you were left wondering whether the connection had mattered. They did not know how to justify it. Because there was no perfect explanation. There were only pieces. Old disappointments. Promises made by other people and broken without warning. A childhood habit of staying quiet whenever emotions became too large. The belief that needing someone gave that person the power to leave. And then there was you. You arrived with a presence that did not feel casual. You listened in a way that made pretending difficult. You remembered details they expected everyone to forget. You noticed changes in their mood before they had chosen words for them. At first, they found comfort in that. Then they found danger. Because the closer you came, the more they began to imagine a future they had not permitted themselves to want. One evening, long before the distance grew between you, they had watched you laugh at something small. Perhaps you do not remember it. The light had fallen across your face, and for a brief second, they saw a scene that did not yet exist. A shared kitchen. 2 cups beside a window. Your voice in another room. A peaceful life built from ordinary mornings. The vision vanished almost immediately, but its effect did not. That was when they first understood that you were not becoming a temporary part of their thoughts. You were beginning to feel like home. And that realization made them retreat. Their friend listened as your person finally admitted pieces of this. Not all at once. The words came slowly, interrupted by long pauses and nervous breaths. Then their friend said something they were not expecting. You think staying away protects them. But what if it only makes them believe they were easy to leave? The sentence struck with painful precision. Your person turned toward the window again, but this time they were no longer watching the rain. They were remembering you. They saw the moments when you tried to hide disappointment behind patience. They remembered the last meaningful conversation between you and the question in your eyes when they failed to say what was needed. They remembered how gently you gave them space. And suddenly, your kindness no longer felt like relief. It felt like trust they had not honored. That night, they went home carrying the weight of that realization. The apartment was dark when they entered. They did not turn on every light. They left their coat across the back of a chair and stood in the middle of the room listening to the quiet. Their phone felt heavier than usual in their hand. They opened your conversation. There were old messages there. Some were simple. Some carried memories that made their chest tighten. One message from you stopped them completely. It was not dramatic. You had written something gentle, something that let them know they did not have to explain everything immediately. You had made room for their uncertainty while still speaking with sincerity. They read it once. Then again. Then a third time. And with every reading, a different meaning emerged. The first time, they remembered how relieved they had felt. The second time, they recognized how much courage it must have taken for you to remain compassionate while hurting. The third time, they realized you had offered them a safe place to tell the truth, and they had answered that gift with more silence. Their eyes filled before they noticed. They placed the phone down, walked to the window, and pressed their palm against the cool glass. For the first time, they did not ask whether you still cared. They asked whether they had waited too long. That question changed the energy inside them. Until then, they had been protecting themselves from vulnerability. Now they were confronted by the possibility of losing something irreplaceable through inaction. They began to imagine your life moving forward. Not as a punishment. Not as a threat. Simply as the natural result of time. They pictured you waking one day without checking for a message from them. They imagined you meeting someone who did not hesitate to say what you deserved to hear. They imagined your heart becoming peaceful in a place where their confusion no longer followed you. And strangely, they wanted that peace for you. But the thought of no longer being part of it nearly broke them. They sat down at the table and opened a blank page. The first sentence came quickly. I have tried to write this so many times. Then nothing. They stared at the words until the screen dimmed. How could they explain that you had changed them without making it sound like a promise they were not prepared to keep? How could they tell you that their distance had not been indifference? How could they confess that nearly every attempt to forget you had only revealed how deeply you had become woven into their thoughts? They deleted the sentence. They tried again. You deserved more honesty from me. This time, they kept it. Then they wrote about the moments they remembered. The sound of your voice when you were trying not to show concern. The way you made them feel seen without demanding a performance. The conversations they replayed late at night. The apology they had carried but never delivered. As the message grew longer, something unexpected happened. They stopped writing only about regret. They began writing about hope. They confessed that part of them still believed the connection between you had not reached its final chapter. They admitted they did not want to return with empty promises, but with a willingness to finally have the conversation they once avoided. Then they paused. There was still one truth missing. The most important one. The truth that had frightened them from the beginning. They moved their hands away from the keyboard and whispered into the empty room, "Say it." But the words remained trapped. Because saying them would change everything. They walked outside, even though it was late. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining beneath the lamps. Cars passed occasionally, their tires moving through shallow water. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and a train sounded beyond the buildings. Your person walked without a destination. They needed movement because standing still made the truth feel too close. At the corner of a quiet street, they saw a couple beneath an awning. One person adjusted the other's scarf before they stepped into the cool night. The gesture was so simple that no one else would have noticed. But your person did. And once again, they saw the life they had imagined with you. Not a perfect life. A real one. Days of laughter and misunderstandings. Long conversations after difficult weeks. Shared silence that did not feel empty. A hand reaching across a table. A familiar voice saying, "You're home." The vision did not frighten them this time. It filled them with grief for every moment they had spent running from it. When they returned, they did not turn on the lamp. They sat in the darkness, opened the message, and scrolled to the final unfinished paragraph. Their fingers hovered above the screen. Then they wrote the sentence they had refused to admit even to themselves. I did not pull away because I felt nothing. I pulled away because what I felt was becoming the most real thing in my life. They read it slowly. Their breathing changed. A strange calm entered the room. The truth was finally visible. Yet the message was still not complete. Because beneath that confession was something even more vulnerable. Something involving a choice they had quietly made earlier that same day. A choice connected to you. A choice that could open the door between you or close it forever. They began the final paragraph. I need you to know that tomorrow, I am going to. They stopped. Their phone suddenly lit up beside them. A notification appeared on the screen. It was your name. And when they saw the first words of your message, every sentence they had written and every decision they thought they had made was about to change. The screen remained illuminated in the quiet room, and for several long seconds, the person you love simply stared at your name. Their heartbeats seemed louder than the silence surrounding them. All the carefully rehearsed words they had planned to say suddenly felt small compared to the reality unfolding before them. With trembling hands, they opened your message. It was not a demand for explanations. It was not a list of old wounds. It was not a goodbye. Instead, your words carried a quiet grace they had almost forgotten still existed. You wrote that you had been thinking about them. You admitted there had been moments when you wanted to stop hoping, but something inside your heart would not allow bitterness to replace compassion. You did not pretend the distance had been painless, yet you also refused to let pain become the final chapter of your story. Your message ended with a simple thought. If there's still something left unsaid, I hope one day we'll finally say it. Those words dissolved the last wall they had been hiding behind. For the first time, they realized that love is not measured by perfect timing. It is measured by the courage to stop pretending. Every excuse they had carried suddenly lost its power. Every fear that once felt overwhelming became smaller than the possibility of losing the future that both of you still quietly desired. They closed their eyes and whispered a prayer they had never spoken before. Give me the courage to become the person I've been afraid to be. The room no longer felt heavy. It felt like the beginning of something. They returned to the unfinished message waiting on the screen. Instead of rewriting every sentence again, they left the truth exactly as it was. It was imperfect, vulnerable, and deeply honest. Then they completed the final paragraph. I don't know exactly what tomorrow will bring. I can't promise there will never be difficult days. But I can promise this: I no longer want fear to speak louder than my heart. If you're willing, I'd like us to begin with honesty. They read the message one final time. Not searching for perfect words. Searching only for truth. And for the first time in a very long while, they found it. When they pressed send, they did not feel panic. They felt peace. Outside, the first light of morning slowly stretched across the horizon. The sky shifted from deep blue into soft shades of gold, as if reminding them that every new day begins quietly before anyone notices its beauty. Across the distance between you, your phone gently lit up. You looked at the notification without rushing. For a brief moment, memories flooded your heart: the conversations left unfinished, the silence that had once felt impossible to understand, and the hope you had almost convinced yourself to release. You opened the message. Every sentence carried the weight of someone who had finally stopped hiding. There were no dramatic promises. No attempts to erase the past. Only honesty. And somehow, honesty was exactly what your heart had been waiting to hear. As you continued reading, you noticed something remarkable. The questions that had haunted you for so long no longer demanded immediate answers. Instead, they were replaced by something stronger. Understanding. You realized that both of you had been carrying invisible battles. Neither heart had been untouched by uncertainty. Neither journey had been simple. Yet somehow, through every misunderstanding and every season of silence, compassion had survived. That compassion became the bridge neither of you believed still existed. When your reply finally came, it was just as sincere. You thanked them for choosing truth instead of fear. You acknowledged the past without allowing it to define the future. And you invited them to take one honest step at a time instead of trying to solve an entire lifetime in a single conversation. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that everything changes overnight. Sometimes the miracle is that two hearts become willing to walk forward together again. The days that followed were not filled with perfection. They were filled with conversations that had once seemed impossible. There were moments of laughter where silence had once lived. There were gentle apologies that no longer carried shame. There were dreams spoken aloud without fear of being misunderstood. Piece by piece, trust returned. Not because the past disappeared, but because both of you chose to build something stronger than the past. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden within this story. The most meaningful messages are rarely the ones written in flawless words. They are the ones written by hearts that finally choose authenticity over fear, forgiveness over pride, and hope over hesitation. If this story has touched something deep within your heart today, may it remind you that healing often begins with one honest conversation, one courageous decision, and one act of grace that changes everything that follows. May your heart never lose its capacity to hope. May wisdom guide your steps when uncertainty surrounds you. May peace replace every anxious thought. May love grow where fear once stood. And may you always have the courage to speak truth with kindness, receive forgiveness with humility, and recognize the beautiful opportunities that arrive when hearts choose compassion over silence. May light surround your path, may hope strengthen your spirit, and may every new beginning lead you closer to the peace your soul has been searching for. Thank you for spending these moments together. If this story encouraged your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that hope is never truly lost. Until next time, may peace, love, and abundant blessings remain with you always.